Hello, my name is Richard. Thank you for asking, what is an addiction? I'll give you my view and then we'll give more information. It is when one behavior or a cluster of behaviors are repeatedly triggered to make an altered emotional state. It is not for a need or for an accomplishment, and it is not a conscious choice. It is triggered by a thought or by the environment, and the environmental triggers are people, places, and things. The accomplishments that may be occasionally gotten during the addictive process are discarded because that is not the purpose. It is an altered emotional state is what an individual is after. Well, physicians, moralists, and psychologists, family and friends are baffled by what they see because no matter what they try to say or do, they cannot stop a person that is addicted. Denial goes to blame and delusion, and frustration to hopelessness for change, and that is when intervention is necessary. The American Society of Addictive Medicine, ASAM, was formed in 1954 to deal with the problems of alcoholism. Define addiction as a chronic relapsing disease of the brain, reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Well, here is what that means. Chronic means it happens often. It's not just here. It's primary because it's nothing else is causing it. It's relapsing, which says that you can get better and you get worse. And being a disease of the brain, it means that something happens to the brain that is now diseased after you take some alcohol or drug. The brain gets diseased. It's not clear how the disease gets into the brain. It's not microbial in nature. It seems to be more the connectivity or wiring of the brain and the activation of certain circuits that are deep inside the brain. And also the memory. We know that people who are addicted have triggers, so there's something about the memory that is different. And related circuitry, which are emotions, motor functions, and so forth. What's broken in the motivation circuitry? What is the reward circuitry that's in the brain? And I'm not saying that those aren't valid points, but it does not have a theory that allows those things to be directly addressed. In 1956, the AMA, following after ASAM, American Society of Addictive Medicine, declares alcohol addiction a disease in order to, if you read the fine print, to obtain research funding, because if it was listed as a behavioral mental function, they could not get any funding for it. But they ignored, though, was a large number of former alcoholics that were free of alcohol, and they didn't use any drugs or any, they just eventually got off of it themselves and stopped using it. Some went through AA and other organizations. Added to that, that it is alcohol addiction. It co-occurs with some other mental disease or psychiatric disease. And so these are called dual diagnoses. In other words, a person is diagnosed as having bipolar and alcohol disease. So, but what those things clearly ignore is the experience in Vietnam in the 70s. The soldiers went to Vietnam. It wasn't a very nice place over there, and it was very hard. Fortunately, they only went for a year, and that made it tolerable for some. But about somewhere on the 20 to 40% of the veterans in Vietnam were addicted to black tar heroin. The experience in the States at that time was that if you're in New York City and you got addicted to heroin, that's in San Francisco and Chicago. That's where most of the heroin addicts were in the large cities at that time, that the heroin addiction was not curable. The problem to explain happened that when the veterans came back, they couldn't come back with their black tar heroin addiction, so they got off of it. About 20% got off of it before they were ready to rotate home, and about 20% still had the addiction at the time of rotation and were compelled to stay there for 2 to 4 weeks more before they were fully able to come back to the United States. Well, Nixon set up group to research this to find out what happened to them after they came back. And what they found is that 95% of the veterans that returned did not go back to heroin after they came back to the States. So in other words, the numbers are completely flipped. It said only 5% went back to the heroin, not 95%. So the thing is, you have to ask yourself, well, what is this? What's the difference? And it was people, places, and things, and thoughts. If they came back, their thoughts went to how can I raise a family? I want to work. I enjoy, many of them learn trades when they're over there. I want to go be a welder. I want to be a body man. I want to work here. I want to do this. I want to build a home. I want a family. I want a wife. And heroin just did not fit into that model for their lives anymore when they came back to the United States. So that is the missing part that was in all of the heroin addicts that were in the big city that were giving no future, no purpose, and no environment in which they could be free from the triggers that they were used to: people, places, things, and thoughts. And so that was the problem. Now, there was an experiment that was concluded, I think it was in 1979, and was published in 1980, and it's been commonly called the Rat Park experiments. And there was a whole combination of rats that were used in the experiments. They forced addicted rats to morphine-laced water, and then put them in what they called Rat Park, which is a fairly large thing. It was like a large sandbox, essentially, in which the rats lived, with males and females. 20 to 30 rats would live in the Rat Park. And they would have wheels and mazes and all kinds of things like that. And for water, they were given the choice of morphine-laced water or plain water. And lo and behold, particularly the male rats that came in 100% addicted to morphine-laced water, within a couple of days were completely off of the morphine-laced water and were drinking only the plain water, because the morphine-laced water was influencing and affecting the quality of the enjoyment, whatever that is, that they had lived. I want to end it with a quote I'm going to read out of Psychology Today. Addiction is a condition that has long baffled physicians and philosophers, to say nothing of those struggling with it and those around them. What to make of a set of behaviors that in fact induces change in brain structure and function, provides short-term relief of distress. That's what you need to remember, short-term relief from distress, only to create long-term problems of living and self-management, and is difficult to stop even when there is a strong desire to do so. Question. Well, once seen as a moral failure, addiction has more recently been viewed strictly as a medical problem. The push to regard addiction as a disease is well-intentioned, driven by a desire to lessen the stigma, but fails to account for the many facets and facts of the condition. Worse, it robs the sufferers of the sense that they can overcome the problem with courage, creativity, and some hard work. I urge you to look at this article in Psychology Today and become more aware of addiction. And the Rat Park experiment, the Vietnam experience, the Portuguese experience today, and to get a really truer representation of what addiction is. Thank you very much for listening, and come back again.